Okay, Jean-Francois Loudcher is a professor of sports science and sports history in the University of Bordeaux. Professor, how are you doing?
Good, good. Thank you, Paul, for this interview. I'm
Yeah,
very
it's
proud of
great.
that. I don't know how it goes, but
Yeah, we've had some logistical difficulties already on both ends, but it's great to see you again. I met you last year in Aix-en-Provence, where Jean-Marc de Grave organized a small conference, and you talked about the history of Savate,
Mhm.
French combat sport, I guess. I don't know whether you would like martial art or combat sport as the term. And you have a very wide-ranging knowledge of French combat sports and European sports in general. So you have been a Savate practitioner in your life.
Yeah, yeah.
Did that come first when you were young, maybe Savate when you were a teenager or something?
Yes, yes, that's right. But I started with judo. I stopped with, and then I restart at 30 years ago. Wait, yeah, 30 years ago. Judo, Aikido. I did a lot of Aikido. Nidan,
Hmm.
so Shodan in judo, and I practice a lot of martial arts, and I started with full contact. When was it? 1978 was in the wave of the Bruce Lee waves,
Yes.
and of course Valera, and in the French, very French famous fighter who did a very big noise during 1975 in Long Beach. You know that story. He fight some, some, he fought uh, some different guy because he wasn't agree with the kind of rules of karate at that time, and he started with an American guy, the full contact, and I became I started uh, with the full contact, and after that, French boxing, because I'm a PE teacher basically,
Yes.
and for my diploma, for my degree, had to be assessed on combat sport, and only French boxing was recognized at the time by French diploma. So I started and I became a fighter. I did 10, 10, 10 fights, something like that.
Okay.
And after that, I became a trainer. I trained some different people at high level because a former student was Savate, world champion of Savate
Mhm.
in 2003, and and French fighter. See, I trained a little bit, and I stopped for now for because I some my bike is a little bit painful, so I did no more French combat or French Savate or even judo. I can't.
Okay. So you teach, I mean, the what subjects and what kind of students do you teach in Bordeaux? Do you teach history mainly, sports science?
Yeah, history and sports science, cultural history as well.
Mhm.
A little bit, I focus on French boxing and English boxing. I started to study English boxing for years, for decades, and I have in my mind I have a plan to to write a book, but it's not for tomorrow on English boxing. And I also teach physical education history because
Okay.
it's very important in France as well. Because you are when you want to be a PE teacher, you have to pass in first degree was one topic is on history and culture of physical education and society, and the second is more focused on pedagogy.
Okay.
After that, you have another assessment, but
Okay. So if we'll talk about Savat first, because I mean, Savate is much more well known in the kind of English speaking world. It has become much more well known over the last maybe 10, 20 years, thanks to, I think thanks to a lot of kind of, these reality sort of martial arts programs where like American guys go around the world and try the different styles. Because I don't think that outside of a French speaking context, many people internationally knew a lot about Savate until comparatively recently, and because of like documentaries and things, it's hugely well known in France, isn't it? Do you find that it's more well known globally now, or
Yeah,
what do you
a
think?
bit. I don't belong to the French Federation of Savate for by now, but now we have 40, 50,000 practitioners in France.
Mm-hmm.
And we have also an international federation of Savate. Who gathers, I don't know exactly, but I would say about 30 countries or something like that. But sometimes in a country like in England, for example, you have only 2 or 3 clubs, or mainly one, and very few people. And I forgot to to mention that in 1990 I was also a trainer in Hungary. Did I mention that? For 3 years, I started a federation and started the Hungary, the Magyar, the French Savate Federation is still going on. It's still running.
Okay, that's
with three clubs, I think 3 or 4 clubs, not very much.
And I think Savate has a lot of mythology associated with it, doesn't it? There are some myths about its origin story and its its mode of invention. The ones that I know, the myths that I know about Savate are: there's a myth that it was invented by sailors in and around Marseille, and the reason why it's a kicking style is that they would hold onto the ropes and things so they didn't fall into the water. But okay, that's myth number 1. Myth number 2 is that in France for a long time it was illegal to, if you punched someone with a fist, it was regarded as potentially an act of murder. So fighting tended to prefer kicking because it was a legal loophole. And then myth number 3 is that Savate is just a kind of corruption of the word silat. So those are the 3. Those are the 3 main myths.
Yeah.
Do you like those stories, or do you dispute them?
No, I don't. I did many research about the first myth. And the only reference which mentioned that Savate would come, and there is another myth linked to the first myth. I wrote in my book that you have here. Yes.
Yeah.
It's 18. We have only one picture of 1844, which represents effectively two sailors who did a kind of high kick with the hand on the ground, and that's all. And the Savate is well known in advance at the beginning with Vidocq memories diaries in 1828.
Okay.
The first time that Savate is mentioned. So it's a little bit after that we mentioned that Savate would come from sailors. And the second myth linked to the first is that, by the way, it's a sailor sailor invented Savate in Marseille. Yeah, it comes from Japan. Because the sailor had a longer stay, would have brought this kind of martial arts from Japan. It's during the 16th, because martial arts in France is growing up. So challenge the judo, to challenge the karate. This myth was
Yeah.
constructed by French Federation, some people in the French Federation, but it's only a myth.
Yeah. I mean, not everyone. People tend to really like a good creation story of something traveling the world and moving around with the sailors and everything. But your archival research suggests a different history, doesn't it? It's a much more kind of urban, Parisian development. Is it specifically
Yes,
Paris, or is
yes,
it just the
yes,
big cities?
yes. In the suburb, we will not, how we can say that, the suburb of Paris. Michel Pisseux, some say Casseux, will have invented that. But the first source is 1828 from Vidocq, who talks about Savate and an history which spent during the last the previous century, about 80, 17, 1798, something like that, in the prison, in jail, called Bicêtre. I did some research, but I didn't find.
Okay.
Yeah. So the first is 1828.
Okay.
Glad to have some different papers, which.
And do they describe kicking and punching or open hands? And do they describe gloves like kind of British boxing or English boxing, or do they?
Yes, because for example in 18, I remember well, in 1833 there's a very famous match against Savate and English boxer in France, in Paris, North Paris, and we have a different match and something like that, contest during this period. But the very famous match between an Englishman and French, with each with their own style, is in 1852. It's a very big match. There are a lot of advertisements. There are the poem on that.
Mhm. And did they each fight according to very distinct principles? I mean, so the French guy kicks and the English guy only punches, or is it more free flowing than that?
During this match, this contest,
Yeah.
each use their proper arms for French kicking, and sometimes they was punching, but more frequently kicking. But very rapidly, very quickly, the influence of the English boxing was present during this match. And in the mid 19th century, Savate is very linked to physical education or history of gymnastics generally.
Okay.
And so when gymnastics entered the school and became compulsory in 1882, Savate had been to transform in a more hygienic way, in a more academic way.
Okay, I was going to ask about that. I was going to say why do you think that kind of from the British side there's no kicking involved, but in the French side there is kicking? But you've just answered that question, which is that both of these sort of slightly older traditions or these older forms become institutionalized in education apparatuses, and that's why it's nothing to do with some kind of ethnic blah 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 or cultural thing. It's institutional. It's like, we will teach this in France, whereas in London they're teaching something else.
Yeah, I would say that. But it would have been different, because during the period of 1850, 1880, there was different style about that, and that book, the style, academic style, okay, but also you have, I would say that saltimbanque in English, saltimbanque, the guy who works in as a demonstrator of Hercule, of strength.
Oh yeah.
And you have also military
Yes.
influence, and there is a kind of mix. And by the end of 19th century, only the academic style grown up and installed the academic way of French boxing. And I think it's a myth that there was French boxing was only Savate. French boxing was only this style. No, you had different styles before that. But the institutionalization, as you said, you're right. During the end of 19th century, French Ministry of Education and the army as well transformed Savate in a more academic way.
And it's, I mean, I don't know a huge amount about Savate other than I mean, I read your work, but that was really, as I'm doing that, I'm learning to read French. So it was kind of like
yes,
following the grammar.
You learn French.
that's me, yeah, learning to read French. But from what I know about, there's a full contact, there's a very light contact, and then there are also some weapons. Is that right? That's in some styles.
Yeah. The stick.
Yeah.
The stick. Also, traditionally is taught in the same time for French boxing. That traditionally it starts around in 19th century, and strongly, and because stick became a weapon of defense. As you may know, that at the end of 19th century, it's not only in France, but in Partie 2 in English, the self-defense became grew up a lot, everywhere in the country.
So there's something about it which it has to be. This is what I've heard. It has to have an elegance to it, much the same way that in Bartitsu, in these kind of late Victorian gentlemanly styles, you don't want to fight like a ruffian. You have to fight like a gentleman. Is that the same thing in Savate?
Yes, because of the institution, army and Minister of Education. But was a sport demand at the beginning of the 20th century. There were some French Savate teachers wanted to start a new style, as we may know now, with full contact or kickboxing. And for 3 or 4 years, when English boxing comes to France at the very beginning of 20th century, 1903, 1904, there was a try to launch a new style of combat. But after 4 years, because 4 years it was a failure, because some technical problem, of course, because for example they don't you kick with the knees, so it's forbidden because of distance. You have to take a right distance with your opponent, and so it was not very, as you mentioned, aesthetic. It was not very beautiful. So institution, French Federation, created in 1903, said, stop. We have to stop this kind of trial of fighting, and academic side definitely before the First World War became well known.
Okay, so I mean, so have there been many significant kind of periods of transformation of Savate? If you say like knees and elbows didn't catch on because they didn't fit the ethos or something, or the culture, have there been any changes, like big significant transformations in rules or practices or training methods?
You say by now, or which period?
I think, I mean, throughout its history, because we've talked about how it maybe emerged in an urban environment as a kind of as dueling or as sport or as fighting, and then it becomes institutionalized and it becomes part of the educational syllabus. What major changes since then have we seen? Has it been sanitized? Well, you said it has been made more hygienic, but what kind of things have we seen through history?
So until the beginning of the 20th century, the fight was very codified. very codified, it was impossible to continue to go on your fight with a clinch, for example. Clinch was completely forbidden, and the referee says stop, or you have to some different style, some different opportunity. For example, in the army, you have to announce your fight, to announce your punch or your kick. Okay, sometimes I kick fouetté haut, for example, and he said that. Or in another model, you have to say only yes. Okay, je suis touché. So I stop. The fight stopped, and the two fighters came in the center, comes into the center of the ring, to stretch and guard and go on the fight. And the fight, according to the English rules, accepted during this short period of 4 years, at the beginning of the 20th century, was completely forbidden. And some people tried during the 1930s, but the French Federation was very strict on that. It's not French boxing tradition, it's not academic French boxing. And it is only in the 1960s that we can see some fight under the influence of full contact, karate, and so on, and Thai boxing, because French, Christian Guillaume went to Japan to fight according to the rules of kickboxing at the time, and he won. He won. I'm sorry, he won 3 times. And we have some records on that. But it was beginning of international match of the and the French Federation started to change the fight. So you with the possibility of continuing your attack with kick, with clinch was possible, sweep also, something like that, and it becomes a real match.
And I think if we change the subject slightly to the academic study of martial arts, or what we call it in English, martial arts studies. When I met you a year or so ago in France, and I was talking about different traditions of study, the academic study of martial arts. So there's the kind of English language tradition, the German tradition, and I had really no knowledge at that time of a wide scale, well-established field of the academic study of martial arts in France. I mean, could you tell us a little bit about the history of that? Because so Francophone martial arts studies, I mean, what is it called in France? And, where do we see it? Is it in all universities or just a few universities? I mean, how does it exist, the academic study, what we would call martial arts studies?
I think, if I remember well, during the 90s or 1980 something, the end of 1980 and the beginning of the 1990s, association started to organize every year called Jorescam. We mentioned that when we spoke together. Jorescam is kind of association and which organize a special conference focused only on martial arts and combat sports. Jorescam, journée d'études sur les sports de combat et les arts martiaux in French. Both of them, because we used to distinct the different things with martial arts. We don't know exactly what it is, coming from East Asian or something like that, and combat sports. We have also now. So this Jorescam is kind of association which organize every 2 years now a conference, but it depends on the organizer. It depends on, and you have also another field of studies which started at the end, the beginning of our 20th century. We focused on European martial history. I am a master something like that, European. And so you have also some studies on the centered on the, for example, the sword, the weapon, or the whistling in France, or something like that, all around Europe. Started also in other department of sport, of in traditional history, for example. And history, okay, now history of martial art and combat sport, now it's general field, which doesn't belong to a specific academic department or something like that. You can in history, I think about history, some very famous historian wrote a book about sword during the 18th century, 17th century, and it's academic history, but it's quite new. It's quite new. When I started to study French boxing, pure historian coming from academic studies, was not very in favor of that kind of stuff.
Okay, so I mean, get the sense that it's mainly a historical study, or are there also psychological, or are there other disciplinary approaches to martial arts, or is it mainly historical?
No. You have different studies, specifically in the association I mentioned previously, Joriscam.
Yeah.
It's a mixed conference. So you have pedagogy, physiology, or anatomy sometimes, but not so much. But by now, sociology. You have a lot of studying sociology now, and our focus on women, for example. In Menson, for example, it's a well-known sociologist in Toulouse, study French Federation and the power of women who changed the rules of the French Federation because they were women.
Okay, so this year's Joriscam conference was cancelled or deferred until the future.
Yes.
Yeah, and you mentioned you might be organising a conference in Bordeaux.
Yes, we'll. So the last Joriscam was planned in Lille with a colleague of mine yes, it was in May, and so it had been cancelled. It has been postponed for I don't know, in June, next June, I think. Right. But every 2 years, normally we have conference. So we apply for organizing conference with the Joriscam under the umbrella of Joriscam in Bordeaux in 2 years. Okay. But we don't know if it is accepted or not by the association, because we have to vote or something very democratic.
And is it always 100% in French, or is there English language components, or should we all learn to speak and present in French before we apply to attend?
No, it's my will to open it to foreign language, especially English, of course. And for example, in Dijon, 5 or 6 years ago, I don't remember, but some American came and for talking about, and was invited for talking about MMA, for example, during the conference, introduction conference.
Oh, because MMA was it's only recently been kind of legalized in France. I mean, what was the situation before? It was just not allowed, or they changed some?
It's not allowed. It was planned normally to be recognized by French Federation, by Federation, Sport Federation. So the sport minister applied for launch a call for who wants to have I would say that to get the MMA under the direction of the federation. So you have Thai boxing, kickboxing, karate, something. Did file about for applying. Okay, well, I want MMA in my federation, because in French it's very regularized, codified. Yeah. And so they don't want, you can't organize an MMA fight with the rule of MMA,
Mm.
depends on which type, of course. But if you don't belong to a French federation, which control, which different the rules, which control with medical examination before the fight and something like that. So it's not allowed yet, but hopefully in the future, very in the future, very soon, it will be authorized, I think.
Yeah, it's a very. I mean, this might be something that's quite unusual to people outside of France or outside of the French way of thinking about organizing sports and organizing activities. Because the first time I encountered this it was a long time ago. I was at a conference, just any old conference about something, and I was talking to a French guy, and we ended up talking about martial arts, right? And he said he was like a black belt in jiu-jitsu, but he was not allowed to teach in France because he didn't have a teaching qualification in judo. So he wasn't born in France, so he came from another country and then he was a French citizen. So I said this, so even though you're a qualified jiu-jitsu instructor, you're not allowed to teach until because jiu-jitsu is kind of bundled in with judo.
Yeah.
And he said that's just the way in France. Because in Britain, or I guess in America, you could just go, well, I'm opening a jiu-jitsu club.
Yeah.
Stop me. But in France, they would stop you. It wouldn't.
Yeah. It may be stopped. It depends if you want to open a course or something like that in jiu-jitsu or in other martial arts for a living, for earning money or not. Is it simply free for pleasure, for leisure? You can have some kind of recognition, but normally you have to pass some examination, some diploma, held by the French Federation of Judo or French boxing, and so. But if you want, if you are a practitioner of MMA, no, not MMA, but another kind of martial arts, which doesn't have a federation, you can create your federation.
So you have to create a federation first before you
are different, but you have to be at least 10 clubs or something like that.
Okay, so if I move to France and maybe I have no job and I decide, okay, I'll open a martial arts club and I'll teach Tai Chi and Eskrima. How would if I wanted to earn money from that and I advertised and I had paying students, would I be in danger from legal retribution, or like, could I be arrested or closed down or fined? I mean, what happens? Do I have to join an association and pass an exam?
Yeah, well, more remote possibilities, a little bit complex to explain, because if you want to teach a dangerous, so-called dangerous martial art, something MMA or boxing, you have to get a qualification. But for example, Tai Chi, it is not dangerous. So
lethal. It's a lethal.
yeah. But for leisure, if you have another qualification in, for example, in fitness, you can teach Tai Chi under your diploma of fitness.
Okay. It's very interesting. It's very interesting because I think that, I mean, in terms of the spread, the globalization or the internationalization of martial arts, I think that when you look at something like judo, which has always been very heavily organized by institutions, all the way from the Kodokan and all the way, and then it might find a national context like France. But even without that, even in Britain, where you can just kind of do whatever you want, judo is recognizable around the world and even before the internet and everything. But something that's free flowing, like a family style of kung fu, or someone just migrates and starts teaching, it can shift and flow and change very easily. But the institutional structure of practices like judo mean that it's hard to change it. Like it has established forms. You have to pass, you have to behave these ways, you move these ways, you use these terms, these are the gradings. So is institutionalization always a kind of good thing, or is it creative, or does it stifle and stultify, or which is better? The freedom of just go and do whatever, or the rules of institutions?
You have different kind of institution. Okay, in England you can open your own style or your own teaching if you want. But for example, for judo, specifically for judo, one of my colleagues, who is judoka and Spanish. He knows very well the judo in Spain, for example. Is three dans, the third dan, but he said, in Spain, it's not very equal as in France. It's not the same. For France, for example, my three dan is value is evaluated to 1, perhaps second, because different region in Spain can organize their own exam, and sometimes when you don't have a main control or an umbrella who control that, so you can specifically, in America, can buy your grades. By the way, I work about the influence of French boxing in Japan. I do a very large article with a man who's French who lives in Okinawa. He sees 7 dans, and he told me, when you have, for example, some American guys, the country, but most American camps, and they say, okay, I'm a 6 dan, 7 dan. He said, it is only 3 green belt or something like that.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about the project, the Okinawa France connection then with martial arts. Tell me about your research on that.
I was, from many years ago, I was struck by the fact of French boxing, according to the army, as what I called, it's another kind of style of model, what I called French boxing model of Joinville on the 4 faces. You see behind you the different army, military who try something, and they organize. It's very new. It's kind of kata. It is a 3 or 4 level kata in 1874, the first demonstration. And when you study karate, this kind of modern kata, I don't say about the ancient or some, but the modern kata, I'm talking about Pinan and Heian, which has been created, invented, launched by Itosu and Co. But in the school of Okinawa at the beginning of 20th century. So 30 or 40 years after the first French demonstration. And as you may know, French military mission was very famous. We have 3 military mission in Japan in 1868. The second was from 1874 until 80, and the last one from 1884 until 1889. So I started to look at the archives and to look at this mission, French military mission, to see if there is no French influence about boxing or about gymnastics. Because at that time, for example, during the 1890s, Japan turned in a military way, exactly like in France, through a kind of teaching, very specific teaching for children, what you used to call bataillon scolaire in French, battalion, children battalion, which exists in France, which existed with Turnen in Germany, and which existed also in Spain from 1890 until 1930. And we have the same, it's called Undokai. Undokai calls it means bataillon scolaire. And the question is how the French military could have influenced Okinawa, because the French didn't go to Okinawa. There is a kind of shift. So we are looking with my colleague Christian Forisson, who has a blog on that. We look at the different French archive, but also different writing on that, Japan archive, but I expect you will read my paper in French and perhaps as well in English when in the future. I don't want to to say all and my findings, but there is some connection. There is
there's some strong kind of institutional.
I couldn't prove now that the French model boxing of Joinville on the four faces was in Okinawa, even in Japan. But for example, during the last mission, a general very well known, Etienne de Villaret, teach at the kind of military infantry school in Japan. He created the French as a Japan military school, and he has a background of gymnastic instructor in Joinville during the 1860s. So he knew, of course, the French boxing on four faces. I have discovered that the granddaughter lived very close to Bordeaux, and 1 month ago, I went to the archives, and I discovered some letters, very interesting letters, which proves that there is some connection between French gymnastics and battalion and children battalion in Japan, but as well in Okinawa, because Okinawa became in 1989 fully part of Japan.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. So this is ongoing research, or this is being written up. When will it be published?
I have to give this kind of my first findings during conference in Sapporo, but was through a through video conference organized by ISPES, International Sport History Education. So in August, and I hope that I'll have to submit this article to a French paper. I don't know exactly. I have some ideas, and after that, I would like to translate in English to propose it to, for example, to Budo to Budo paper or something like that.
Fabulous. That's really interesting. So that will be, I guess, that's your main martial arts research work for the next 6 months, 12 months, maybe. Yeah, that's really interesting. That's really significant, I think.
I have to go to the National Archive of the Defense Army in Paris, but now it's closed. So I'm waiting.
Yeah, you wait. Excellent. So, so that will be. So we might be able to read about this stuff within 12 months, 15 months, something like that. But I guess before that, if you do present online via Zoom or Skype or something, I guess maybe, so you will be speaking in French or English or Japanese? English. Oh, so I wonder if we could maybe find out if that can be made available publicly. That would be great, wouldn't it? Yeah. Do that. Okay, so I guess.
One thing I would like to add: the French influence was also very high in Brazil.
Okay.
There is. I was in a panel of doctorate very recently, so online, and a man the name is Olivier Malo, did his doctorate about Brazilian history. And he discovered some that the very first mention is 1854, that Savate came into Brazil for fighting, for demonstration, and especially at the beginning of the 20th century. So French boxing is everywhere.
Everywhere, but it just doesn't have the kind of recognition that it deserves. It's been there for so long, and people just don't know the history of it and don't acknowledge the presence of it. I think that maybe the time of French combat sports and French martial arts is coming into the English-speaking world now. And we'll have much more cross-linguistic and cross-cultural.
Your colleague Jennings wrote a paper about very recently about French history of French boxing in England.
Yeah,
I haven't read that. Haven't read it.
Yeah, he's written that. He's been working on that. I mean, George Jennings works on all sorts of things at the same time. But I think you're right what you say about Savate in the UK. It's very, very marginal. Very, it's a very rare thing. It's. Right. I mean, you can't buy in Britain. You can't buy like Savate boots. You can't buy the footwear. You'd have to contact an instructor, who would then have to contact someone in France to send them. It's strange how the countries are so close to each other, but there is no straightforward communication. You would think that wouldn't you think that wouldn't be a problem. But it's the same, I guess. It's like, I can be doing this research for all these years and still not be aware of what's happening in the French context, because we live in such a kind of Anglophone world. Well, I do.
We'll see in 2 years if we organize a Joyce-Cam in Bordeaux. You're welcome. I hope to. Yeah.
No, that would be great. I mean, we'll certainly try to work together and at least publicize it or help to make it more visible to English speakers and English readers. That would be great. But Jean-Francois Loudcher, it's been absolutely wonderful talking to you again and to see you again. Thank you for taking the time to speak to me.
Thank you for inviting me.
We'll meet up in the real world, in the physical world soon enough. Thank you.